Welcome again, everyone. We're happy to have you here today for this webinar on Building America's Talent Pipeline with our special guests, Philip Hardin, CEO of YouScience, and Ralph Schultz, President and CEO of the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce. Before I turn the program over, we have a few housekeeping notes. First, please remember to place your phone on mute and refrain from placing the call on hold. This avoids any background noise. Second, we have reserved time for questions at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions, please ask them using the question function in the webinar access panel. The question box is in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Just type in your questions and we will read them aloud. Third, this webinar will be recorded and the link will be emailed to attendees. Let's welcome our speakers. Philip Hardin is CEO of YouScience, a one-of-a-kind career discovery profile designed to help students better understand their natural abilities, broaden awareness of career opportunities, and make more informed decisions about their individual pathway from education to career. Prior to helping found YouScience, Mr. Hardin helped transform a small technology firm called aptitudes into the nation's largest financial and administrative information exchange company, Change Healthcare. Throughout his 17-year tenure at the company, which has previously operated under the name WebMD Corp. And MDN Inc., Mr. Hardin spearheaded product and business development efforts. He led the company's $500 million provider business segment and played an integral role in the company's growth from startup to a company with more than $1.3 billion in revenue. Ralph Schultz was named President and CEO of the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce by the Chamber's Board of Directors in November 2006, following a 30-year career in nonprofit management, marketing, and fundraising. In taking the position, he accepted a leadership role at one of Middle Tennessee's oldest and largest business federations, an organization dating back to its founding in 1847. He currently serves on numerous civic and nonprofit boards, including the Nashville Healthcare Council, Tennessee Business Roundtable, Nashville Health, Music City Music Council, Nashville Predators Foundation, Western Governors University Advisory Board, and Board of Trustees of Father Ryan High School. He is a past board member of Alignment Nashville and Center for Nonprofit Management. He has been involved with the Transit Alliance of Middle Tennessee, served on the Citizens Advisory Committee for Bus Rapid Transit, MTA Strategic Plan Advisory Committee, and the Nashville Next Steering Committee, and Major League Soccer to Nashville Advisory Committee. He has participated in Leadership Nashville, Leadership Middle Tennessee, and Leadership Music. And now, Philip Hardin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Over the next few minutes, what we want to focus on is helping you understand how to develop local talent more effectively. And we're going to touch on three areas. First, we're going to focus on the students themselves. Second, we're going to then focus on how to engage educators so that they can more effectively guide these students toward high-wage, high-demand careers. And third, how to more effectively engage with educators and students as chambers and as local businesses. But before we do that, I'd love to have Ralph introduce some of the efforts going on with the Nashville Chamber.
Phil, thanks. Hi, everybody. Great to be with you all this afternoon. We're all in the same game together, and we all know what the pressures are on economic development and prosperity development in general. I think we all share the understanding that development of workforce is probably the big challenge for our communities having prosperous growth in the future. In Nashville, education has been a top priority of the Chamber during my tenure of 12 or so years. And a lot of that time has been spent on the pre-K-12 category of education, although now we're very engaged in post-secondary work and development work. As a growing city, we know what the birth rates are telling us about the availability of workforce. We know that we need to prepare young people in the pipeline for with higher skill quality. And a lot of that is affected by their level of interest and their aptitudes. So I look forward a little bit later in this webinar to sharing with you how we've been using YouScience, how critical YouScience is as a tool for us in a full sequence of causing students to be productive and fulfilled employees down the line.
Thank you, Ralph. Each one of you on the phone is really an expert, particularly in your community, on America's skills gap. And as Ralph talked about, there's a tight labor market across the United States. And so I really won't go too much into describing the disconnect between American education and the requirements of the marketplace. But what I will say is that even though there is a skills gap, and y'all know that very well, there is not a talent gap. The kids that we have in our schools across America have the ability to do the work that we need to have them do. However, we have to have better tools to uncover those talents and direct that skills development. And that's what we're really going to talk about today. So part of the cause that we look at is how our education system measures talent. Currently, the education system uses the ACT, SAT, GPA, and a whole host of standardized tests to measure talent. And that is great. If you happen to be high math, high vocabulary, you're the gold star kid. You're the winner. However, all of these kids have talent. They just have different talent. And as each of you know, the industries that you have in your community need everybody's talent. The second cause we look at is the fact that the career guidance hasn't changed since the early 70s. It's still basically an interest survey that asks you, would you rather do inventory in a retail store or QA in a manufacturing environment or work with test tubes in a lab environment? When we all know that the kids in our communities haven't done any of those. And we refer to this as an exposure gap. They just don't know. And it's particularly harmful to young women, minorities, poor kids, urban kids, rural kids, any kids with a narrow vision of opportunity. And so what do we do differently? So our first thing that we focus on is, instead of just asking them, what do you want to do, when they have this exposure gap, we actually use game-like exercises, 5 to 8 minute exercises to measure aptitudes. These are things like spatial visualization, inductive reasoning, sequential reasoning, numerical reasoning, idea generation, and so on, so that we can actually help them measure and uncover their natural abilities. And then we also ask them interests, because our objective is to help guide them toward careers that they'll do naturally well and they'll like to do, and that the market needs them to do. The second thing that we find is YouScience, because we actually use performance measures of aptitudes in these games, we actually cut through the social noise. Because as you well know, if you ask, a majority of, young women, for example, early on, if they in middle school or early high school, if they want to be involved in manufacturing or IT or so on, likely you get a very quiet answer, or a no, and they're choosing others. Yet they have awesome talent to do that. Because we're using the performance measures, we're able to cut through that social noise. The second is that we generate real information, real data that allows communities to start to build a more effective talent pipeline and get the information to educators and to employers so that we can engage these kids in work study and more effectively align kids with these opportunities based on both their aptitudes and interests. And finally, when you're thinking about your local school system, it's important to make schools investable, because it's one thing to ask for charitable donations because you want to help poor kids, but it changes the entire dialogue when you can take a school and instead of just saying, these are poor kids, can you help them? You can say, hey, there's 222 kids here with a high aptitude and or interest for manufacturing engineering or manufacturing production. That turns it from a charitable donation to an investment in talent pipeline. And so one of the most important things that we do is try to guide students toward the economy. Because if we guide students away from the economy, we're not only hurting the students, but we're also, creating a shortage in the labor markets. And so what we've done here is this is a sample of 45,000 Georgia students as we've worked across the state of Georgia. And what we measure is we've got 500 careers. And when we look at these careers, we look at them both as interest-only recommendations, aptitude only, and then we look at them collectively. But when we take a traditional interest-only view, what we find is, and we took the top 50 of these 500 most frequently recommended careers, and we found that 2/3 of that top 50, most frequently recommended based on interest alone, were directing kids to arts and entertainment, education, social work, and life sciences, things like psychology, sociology, and archaeology. And so when you think about why is psychology one of the most frequently pursued majors in America, a lot of it's because that's what we're telling the kids to do. Yet we all know not that many jobs for a 4-year degree in psychology. But when we look at interest only and their ability, we found that not a single one of the top 50 most frequently recommended careers were directed toward computer science or manufacturing, sales, engineering, or distribution and logistics. Okay, yet 46%, or almost half of these high demand careers, were in the top 50 based on aptitudes. So when I said the kids have the talent, that's not just conjecture. That's based on the data that the kids have the aptitude to do the work that we need them to do. Second is University of Missouri did some outstanding research using YouScience, and we opened up our nationwide database to them so that they could study gender and the impacts of interest and aptitudes. And so they selected 24 high schools across 14 states, over 7,200 kids for this study. And they measured 74 different careers across 4 or 5 key industries. And let's look at the results. When they looked at just the interest only and compared high interest for the young men in blue with the young women in red, and high interest was defined as top quartile. What it shows is that only 12% of the young women had a high interest in computer technology, yet over 39% of the young men had a high interest in computer technology, who were being in this top quartile. And it even got starker for manufacturing and construction. Only 7% of young women had a high interest in manufacturing, and only 6% had a high interest in construction. And over 40% of the young men had a high interest in those 2 industries. Yet it flipped around when you looked at healthcare patient care, things like nursing, physical therapy, where the young women had a much higher interest than the young men. And when you look at healthcare technology, it goes the other way, things like surgical techs, radiologic techs, pharm techs. So the interest surveys that are traditionally used pull through all of the social bias we would expect. Yet when we looked at aptitudes, it was almost perfectly equal. across all of those industries, where young women and young men had the same aptitude for across these industries. And if you look, you can even say that the young women actually slightly outperformed young men on computer technology, for example. So our Google guy that was completely wrong. So we've got kids with the same natural ability to do the work, yet we're using interest surveys and we're guiding them away, in this case, young women away from these high demand areas. So one of the things that's important is it's really important to not think of, just giving career guidance to a young person in isolation. Okay, it really takes a community. So we look at pulling in 3 different constituents into this conversation. Number 1, we focus on students and parents. And our job is to increase the self-efficacy, that belief that I can for this student, and expand their vision of opportunity, and at the same time, inform the dialogue between student and parent. Second is engaging schools. How do we make sure that we're providing schools information so that they are more effectively able to engage the student, but also we're providing them academic tools. And we'll talk about some of that with when Ralph talks about the academies. Okay. The next set is to actually start to engage local employers and chambers, because we try to provide tools to facilitate this dialogue and this interaction between the schools, the chambers, and the students. And here we're focused on making job connections and facilitating work-study programs so that we can increase the ROI to the employers. The otherwise, and then between the employers and the chambers and the schools, it's really starting to transform that from just a random act of education to a talent pipeline. And before we head to Nashville, I want to show you something that we did on behalf of the Metro Atlanta Chamber. And what they've done is ask us to do a talent pipeline analysis for 8 school districts in and around Metro Atlanta. And so here is an example of something we've done for Clayton County schools. And just to show you, Clayton County is, just south of Atlanta. It is the kids that we've worked with are 98% non-white and over 90% free and reduced price lunch. And so one of the things that you'll find is instead of just looking at these kids as, poor kids, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things the Metro Atlanta Chamber wants us to do is showcase the talent, to make these schools more investable and make it easier for their employers to engage. So we've done, for each of the schools, we've done a talent pipeline analysis. And here on the screen, you can see we did it across 4 or 5 industries. So this one is showing manufacturing, engineering, but we did manufacturing, production, so on, IT, healthcare, distribution and logistics, and construction. And what we found is that particularly for the young women, for example, in this case, you can see that there are almost 500 young women with the aptitude for manufacturing, in engineering, yet only 78 with the interest for manufacturing engineering. And so there's a lot of talent here in Clayton County, more than people know. And so how do we enable chambers and employers to partner with schools to identify these kids, engage them in work-study programs, and start to pull them through so that they can pursue an education and find those high-wage careers? So at this point, I want to turn it over to Ralph and talk a little bit about more of the Nashville initiative.
Okay. So my commentary is going to be more oriented toward how we practically apply this to that pipeline aspect of workforce. I mean, we're all working with three basic pools of workforce: a pipeline, a retention of talent in our communities, and an in-migration of talent to our communities. But that pipeline is the sustaining source of the talent that we need. Let me start first by saying why we were impressed with YouScience. As we have tried to affect the pipeline, we have been working with employers and education institutions to create curricula that meets the needs of those employers. So we're well aware of those economic sectors that are the most important and the strongest in this Nashville metropolitan region. So working with those institutions, it took a little bit of time and a little bit of investment, but we were able to bring some alignment between those employers and those institutions. But one of the things we realized was that students were still entering those institutions with choice. They could choose what curriculum that they wanted to follow, and we were finding that their choices didn't necessarily align with the economic opportunity. So one of the things that we did years ago, and now it's fully wall to wall in this community, in our secondary education community, we helped to establish the academies of Nashville. And the purpose for establishing the academies was to create relevance for the students as they matriculated through their high school experience. That is, they were getting a college prep education. They were getting an education that encouraged post-secondary advancement, but they were doing it within the context of career opportunities that were relevant to our local or our metropolitan economic opportunities. But we had continued to search for the method to influence those young people to enter the right career academy for them that presented the greatest opportunity. So in our process of exploration, we came across YouScience. And what impressed us about YouScience was, number one, the methodology of the testing and the way they identified the interest and the aptitude. The use of those exercises, which was a much more dependable method for identifying the true capability of those young people entering the system. The second thing that impressed us was their reporting mechanism. And that reporting mechanism didn't eliminate options for these students, but it gave them an indication of what suited them best, what was perhaps a little riskier, but sort of in their category. And then those things that, probably weren't a natural fit for them. And then the final component that impressed us was that YouScience provided real decision-making information. What are the career paths? What are the compensation levels? What are the education requirements going forward? So we really saw that as a pretty complete way to start these young people's journey to making that choice about the education that they would pursue. So our metro schools were already invested deeply in other instruments that they used that we felt were less effective. And it was difficult for them to break that tie, to break that habit. So we offered to fund the first year and then fund partially the second year their use of the YouScience instrument with their students, and then with the agreement that if it was effective, they would fund it themselves going forward, which they are doing. We've been involved with them now a couple of years. One other parenthetical here, as we introduced YouScience to adults in the education system and our business leaders, we found a lot of them going online to use the commercial device with their own kids to help them create a direction for their own family members, and in some cases, even adults that took the thing. So how does this work with us? In the ninth grade, these students will take the YouScience instrument. We also sponsor for those ninth grade students across the city a career fair where businesses come into our convention center setting. They set up booths and they interact with the young people about those career opportunities. We've been doing this since before we used the YouScience instrument. And last year, what we noted from those business participants who were unaware of our activity with YouScience, they came to us afterwards and they say, what changed in the school system? These students came to our booths with better questions. They wanted to have longer conversations. They seemed as if they were prepared to question and delve deeply into this career possibility as compared to years past when people just kind of skipped around booth to booth. The other thing that we found important as we deployed in these academies, and there are about 350 businesses involved in these high school academies across Nashville, was that we were better able to aim at schools to help close that exposure gap. One of the things we were finding was that disparity between interest level and aptitude level. And what we discerned was what you've already heard, that lack of interest was really connected to a lack of exposure to those career opportunities in that category. So as we recruited the volunteers, as we recruited the businesses to be involved in these academies, we would deploy them toward places where this exposure gap existed to help create an awareness of the opportunities that the students could then use as they plotted their education future in the high schools as well. Then the final thing I would tell you is that there is currently an emphasis in Nashville on helping these students to identify career opportunities that they can begin to undertake right out of high school. They can continue their education because the governor has established a free tuition policy for our specialized one-year post-secondary programs for certification and also two-year community colleges. But those students are now hitting their senior year with the knowledge of YouScience, the experience in the Career Academy, and they are actually achieving work certifications in those categories that their interest and their aptitude matches on, as well as the career opportunities that exist in our economy. Some of them are choosing to go directly into careers. Some of them are choosing to go directly into post-secondary education related to those careers, and some of them are actually doing both. They're doing a bit of work and they're doing a bit of education, and that is benefiting our workforce availability to our employers, and we are beginning to hear that from our employers. So YouScience is really the beginning of a process aimed at the student to help them guide their education, guide their opportunity, and it is working in complement to the academies of Nashville and the high schools, and then the post-secondary opportunities that the state of Tennessee is providing to those young people. Is that enough?
That's awesome. Well, and by the way, Rob, thank you. And we love working with you guys at the Chamber and the Metro Nashville Schools. And as a result of y'all's leadership, we're going to probably, even though we just started, last year was our first year with you guys.
Mm-hmm.
This year, we'll work with well more than 100 Tennessee schools.
Great.
So it's spread well beyond Middle Tennessee, but it's going to be across large parts of Tennessee this year. So we'll be probably up around 130, 140 Tennessee schools because of y'all's leadership.
Well, we mostly love the work that you're doing in the Nashville metropolitan area because it gives us an advantage right now on workforce creation.
Now y'all are doing something particularly cool with it. So you're leading in that regard. And so again, our discussions is all about, making the most of your local talent and figuring out how to help local chambers, local employers partner with schools to more effectively engage these students in a process of self-discovery and in a process that allows y'all to actively build that talent pipeline. And so at this point, I'd love to open it up for questions.
Hi, Philip. This is Tenjo with HGCE. I do have a question, and I guess it's two-part to you, Philip, and you as well, Ralph. Regarding the feedback, do you receive feedback from the teachers and/or the school districts within Nashville, and then for you, Philip, beyond Nashville? And if so, what type of feedback have you received? I mean, because the teachers have they have that specific type of view as to how the kids are prepared through school and what this type of program can do for them. So it's interesting to hear what their thoughts have been and how they have received this the program.
Yes, we get feedback. And Ralph, I'm going to turn it to you so that, from the superintendent and all that, have you gotten feedback?
Well, we've gotten feedback from the system and we've gotten feedback from the teachers, but we also get feedback from the business people that are involved with this as well. The feedback that we get from the system is that as a result of this experiment, in quotes, with YouScience, they have realized the additional value that they're getting from this instrument, particularly as it relates to helping to focus the student, but also they're bringing in assets from the business community, and they want those business community assets to be well targeted. They want, partially because it energizes those business people to be more engaged because they see real effect. And the school systems are benefiting as well because they're getting a more targeted benefit. From the teachers, what we hear, they feel that YouScience, connected with these other activities, but YouScience as a discernment tool for those young people, they don't feel expert in all of the categories that are addressed in YouScience, and so they don't feel they can provide complete guidance and counseling to those young people. The fact that those young people are getting more information as a result of the instrument itself is something they comment on a lot. They've also commented on the fact that experience-based testing is what I would call it, Phil. They believe that that's a more reliable way to truly uncover the capabilities of students.
Yes, and so something that, because we work with Nashville schools and the feedback from Nashville schools, but we're statewide in Georgia and across the country in many schools. And so at a superintendent level, they're focused on economic development because they're sitting on the chamber. They're interested in the workforce development, aspect and that kind of showcasing their talent. From a counselor perspective, from a CTE director perspective, and at that level, it allows them to actually engage in a process where we give them tools to do it that are easy. And part of it is, one, as you said, we developed it as a consumer product, so they don't have to be expert because they don't have time to be expert. And they don't have time to walk everybody through it one-on-one, so they don't have to. Second, we give them the academic advising tools so they can get kids into the right CTE program. They can get kids into the right technical and community college programs, and they can do that at scale. So part of our job is to make their job easier by giving them these academic advising tools.
Wonderful. Our next question from Jenny Lomos. I hope I pronounced that correctly. How long is the assessment?
The Total assessment time is 75 to 90 minutes, and you can break it up into there's 11 5 to 8 minute sections, so that there's really three parts to it. So you have the assessment part, and most of the time they'll split that between two 45-minute class periods. Okay? And then we give them a lot of personal feedback on their aptitudes, so that they can understand their talents and find talents they didn't even think they had. And it's done in 100% affirmative language, and it doesn't show scores, because what we found with showing scores, they're taught by the education to never fail anything. Yet in life, you want somebody to focus not on what you don't do well, but you want them to help find their aces. And so we use a really engaging way to help them find their aces. And then the third element is giving these kids a really neat career discovery process. So as Ralph said, we can not only expand their vision of opportunity, but we can give them and their parents enough information so that they can start to make informed decisions about what they naturally do well, what they like to do, and what the local economy needs them to do.
Brittany Holmes, can you say more about what the Chamber's role was in connecting employers with schools?
Well, yes, the Chamber's role, we are really the central role in exposing businesses to the opportunity that career academies, that was our first step. Exposing businesses to the opportunities that career academies demonstrated both in academic achievement and in career preparation. Businesses bought in partially because they wanted the schools to be more effective, but also partially because they realized before anybody that they were going to have workforce pressures going forward. So our role was really to introduce the concept to them. And what was key with that was we had to tell them what the objectives were, what were the goals that we were setting. And initially they had a lot to do with things like school attendance and academic performance. But we also they had to be comfortable with the fact that the school system was going to provide the appropriate support and opportunity those career academies to operate successfully. So we had to tell them a little bit about the logistics of how it was going to be executed. But I will tell you that the Chamber was the primary force. Now, since that time, as we become wall to wall, we share that responsibility with several other organizations in the community that also engage business people in those classrooms.
Probably one other point I'd make on that too is that when it comes to YouScience, the Nashville Chamber had been working with the Academy model for some time with Metro Nashville schools. We work with a lot of chambers that this is one of their first engagement tools with the school system, because what it does is then it gives everybody a different view and ability to quantify the talent in that area. So that instead of looking at a bunch of schools that say, well, they've got an average of 2021 ACT and an 83% graduation rate, we could then transform the view of that talent into manufacturing, information technology, and healthcare, and distribution, logistics, construction, and so on, so that they can speak the same language. Mm-hmm. And so we work with chambers at all different levels of engagement with the school system.
I would like to say one last thing about where YouScience has been helping us in the past couple of years, and that is that more and more businesses, the St. Thomas Health as an example, or Bridgestone Firestone as another example, they're actually installing working businesses within those schools, which represents a pretty significant investment. In the Bridgestone Firestone case, it's an auto maintenance facility. In St. Thomas, it is more of a certification, a medical tech and lab certification program. But where YouScience has helped us with that is that it has given real data about the student community that helps those businesses to understand that they can make a deeper investment and it is going to pay off, because we can see the data on the student or the student interest and aptitude, and they can orient their investment to those places where that aptitude and interest is strongest.
Other questions?
Yes, we do. And again, our friend Jenny Lemos, she has another question about cost. Is there a cost associated with this?
Yes, there is. What we do, the students get a 10-year license to YouScience. These are high school students. And so there is no cost for the 10-year student license for the high schools, to offer YouScience and the career guidance. However, there is a cost for the analytics. So some of the basic analytics about the CTE advising and the technical college advising are $750 per school. And then, some of the others may be more custom work, so talent pipeline work. And so it's really just for the analytics. The middle school version of YouScience is about $500 per school.
Got it. Robin Willis, is there a tester account we can use to show, is there a tester account we can use to show this to our decision makers?
Sure. So a couple suggestions. One, if they'll just go to youscience.com and fill out that form, we'll be glad to share the presentation and get you whatever materials you need to be able to have this dialogue internally, or get on a separate call with the folks at the local chamber and just go through a similar kind of presentation, but we'll customize it to your particular needs. Also, if anybody wants to take YouScience, or you have kids that you want to, we specialize in kids, so if you've got any kids out there that, you want to have take it, we'll be glad to provide it to them. But just go to youscience.com and fill out a request for information form. We'd love to work with you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. That concludes all of the questions that we have. Thank you to our attendees for listening. Again, Philip, Ralph, thank you so much for this informative presentation. And again, everyone, I will certainly forward the presentation to all attendees. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.